At our office party, my boss gave his favorite a $45,000 bonus on stage and handed me a pair of $2 slippers with my name misspelled on the tag. That was the moment the whole room applauded, and I just stood there, heat rising in my neck, pretending the cheap soles didn't still have the clearance barcode stuck to the bottom. People clapped because they always clap when the CEO tells them to, not because anyone believed I deserved footwear instead of money. The party was mandatory. Of course it was. A rented hotel ballroom. String lights that flickered unevenly. DJ looping Mariah Carey for the third time, and catering that was both overpriced and underseasoned. Name badges were forced on us at the door. Mine said, Jaden Collin, missing the S. No one cared enough to fix it. I'm not the loud one in the office. I don't wear cufflinks or talk about golf trips. I run numbers. My spreadsheets close gaps that would otherwise bleed millions. But that night, none of it mattered. The CEO took the stage, voice booming with false warmth, and called up the favorite. Let's call him Brad. Brad strutted up like a game show contestant, hair perfectly messy, shoes polished enough to see the lights reflect. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO announced, our top performer this quarter, a man who redefines innovation, who brings in deals no one else could imagine. For his extraordinary contributions, a well-earned bonus of $45,000. Applause thundered. Phones came out to record. Champagne glasses clinked. Brad laughed with just enough humility to appear charming, hugging the CEO while holding up the giant ceremonial check, like a prop from a lottery commercial. Then the CEO scanned the crowd. And of course, we value every member of our family here. Let's not forget Jaden. He dragged my name out, mispronounced it, and someone shoved me gently toward the stage. I walked up under the two bright lights, pupils shrinking. He reached under the podium and pulled out a small, glossy shopping bag. Inside, the slippers, branded with the company logo, foam already peeling at the edges. For those late nights at the desk, he said into the microphone, laughing. A ripple of chuckles spread through the room. I forced a smile, held the bag as if it weighed more than gold, and returned to my table. Brad raised his champagne toward me like we were equals in some comedy sketch. The slippers dug into my palm, stiff plastic straps biting into the skin. The rest of the night passed in fragments, people pretending not to meet my eyes, the DJ trying to cover the awkwardness with louder music, the CEO moving from group to group with his practiced charisma. I sat quietly, the bag at my feet, the soles of the slippers pressing against my shoes like an insult I couldn't escape. When the party ended, I walked out into the cold night air alone. No one offered me a ride. My breath fogged against the dark, streetlights buzzing overhead. Back in my apartment, I set the slippers on the desk beside my keyboard. Their cheap foam smelled faintly of rubber and dust. For a long minute, I just stared. Then I opened my laptop, created a new folder, named it Santa. Because if my boss wanted to play Santa, handing out bonuses like gifts, I was going to unwrap every secret hidden under that tree. I didn't rage. I didn't throw the slippers away. I just sat there, fingers hovering over the keyboard, already outlining the steps. The party was their show. What came next would be mine. If you want to find the lie, start with the footnotes, not the headline. That's something I've learned after years of combing through quarterly reports, vendor invoices, and pipeline spreadsheets. The headlines are polished for the board and shareholders. The truth hides in margins, in the quiet places nobody expects anyone to check. The morning after the party, my inbox was clogged with obligatory, "What a great event" emails. Photos of Brad holding his oversized check circulated on Slack like propaganda posters. I ignored them. I had slippers staring at me from the corner of my desk and a folder named Santa waiting to be filled. My workday looked normal on the surface, but in the background, I started pulling exports. Our CRM, every opportunity tagged as closed won in the last quarter. The finance system, bonus allocations, and payroll codes. I dug into metadata, file histories, timestamps. Numbers don't lie, but people bend them until they scream. Brad's record quarter hinged on a handful of massive deals with a new vendor partnership. At least, that was the story. But when I compared the CRM pipeline stages against actual booked revenue, something stank. Deals marked as closed had no invoices issued. UIDs, unique identifiers, were duplicated across multiple entries, like someone had copied and pasted without understanding the trail. And then the kicker. The final Q4 roll-up file had been edited at 12:43 a.m., not by Brad, by the CEO's executive assistant. No analyst works spreadsheets at midnight the day before board review, unless they're cleaning something up. I kept my face neutral all day, even when Brad swaggered past my desk, joking about buying a new watch with his bonus. I clicked Save As quietly, labeling each export with a timestamp and hashing the files, so any tampering would show up later. That afternoon, I stopped by payroll under the excuse of clarifying an expense report. The payroll lead, a hit Dana, looked up from her mountain of coffee and spreadsheets. She's the kind of person who notices every cent and resents every interruption. But when I mentioned the $45,000 bonus, her eyes flicked. Yeah, she said flatly. That didn't come from compensation. It came from Innovation Moments Fund. She said the last words like they tasted sour. What's that supposed to be? I asked. She shrugged. Ask the board. They approved it 2 years ago for pilot projects. Not for this. I left with my expense question unanswered, but something better. A thread. A budget line meant for experiments had been rerouted into Brad's pocket. That explained why the bonus didn't show in the normal payroll ledger. That night, I went to a discount store and bought another pair of the same slippers. Identical barcode, same clearance tag. This time I kept the receipt. Paper trails matter, even for symbols. Back at my desk, I placed the new pair beside the originals. Twin reminders. One mocked me. The other belonged to the story I was building. Every fraud has a narrative, and every narrative needs props. By midnight, the Santa folder had 3 subfolders: CRM exports, payroll anomalies, receipts. I wasn't collecting souvenirs. I was building a case. And cases, unlike bonuses, don't vanish in applause. I didn't need a smoking gun, just a room where smoke had nowhere to go. The trick wasn't to prove everything myself. It was to build a stage where the right people would reveal themselves. Brad thought of himself as untouchable. The CEO thought his charisma could smooth over anything. Me? I just needed patience, a little technical discipline, and a paper trail they couldn't erase. First step, salting the spreadsheets. I made duplicates of the Q4 roll-up and inserted hidden checksum formulas, tiny cells disguised in corners, that would break if anyone touched the wrong numbers. It wasn't sabotage, it was a tripwire. If Brad corrected anything, the checksum would expose it. Second step, Slack. Our company archived everything, but most people forgot that messages could be exported by admins. I submitted a routine compliance pull request, citing a vendor audit. When the archive landed in my inbox, I didn't even need to open every message. Just scanning metadata showed edits, deletions, midnight logins. It wasn't a story yet, but it was a map. Third step, force a screen share. I scheduled a cross-team sync on pipeline reconciliation. Put Brad, myself, and a junior analyst in the same Zoom room. Brad had to share his screen, walk through his numbers, and narrate them live. I stayed quiet, asking only small, clarifying questions. Meanwhile, I recorded everything. Our company's default setting allowed local recordings with a single click. The human side mattered too. I saw how Brad leaned into performative kindness in the break room, asking people about their weekends loudly enough for half the floor to hear. How the CEO dropped by, unannounced, with a family speech, reminding everyone how lucky we were to be part of something bigger than ourselves. It was theater, and most people accepted it because challenging it meant risk. At night, I drafted and deleted an ethics report more times than I could count. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing fraudulent allocation before backspacing. There's a difference between suspicion and evidence, between career suicide and whistleblowing. Each draft I deleted left me staring at the slippers under my desk, the rubber soles faintly glinting in the glow of my monitor. Then the net tightened on its own. Brad emailed me a small favor late one evening. Could I fix a rounding error in his spreadsheet before it went to the CEO? I opened the file he sent. My salted checksum had flipped red. He had tampered with the duplicate. Not fixed. A tamper. That was the moment. Not rage, not triumph, just quiet certainty. The net had closed. I saved the file, preserved the metadata, and tucked it neatly into the Santa folder. The case was no longer theoretical. Someone had walked straight into the tripwire. The next morning, Brad swaggered through the office, talking about test driving sports cars. I let him talk. I let him laugh. I even nodded. Because I knew. The slippers at my feet weren't cheap anymore. They were evidence. I sent one email that didn't go to my boss. It went over him. I'd spent weeks collecting files, setting traps, preserving metadata like a crime scene photographer, but evidence means nothing if it dies in someone's inbox. So instead of sending my memo up the chain, I routed it sideways to the ethics mailbox monitored by the board audit chair, and, more importantly, their outside counsel. Once it left my laptop, it was beyond the CEO's reach. The memo wasn't dramatic. Just 10 pages of plain English explanations, appendices of spreadsheets, screenshots of Slack metadata, and one damning ledger entry. $45,000 moved from Innovation Moments budget into payroll. Timestamped the week of the party. I stripped out emotion, sarcasm, even adjectives. Just dates, names, and numbers. Numbers are clean. When I hovered over the send button, my hand shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of it. The mouse felt cold under my palm, like metal left out in winter. My breathing slowed. In the corner of my screen, the wall clock ticked loud enough I could almost hear it. I pressed send. The effect wasn't immediate. It never is. At first, the office moved as usual. Slack channels full of memes, email threads about client lunches. But under the surface, something shifted. Brad stopped, CCing half the office on his wins. The CEO, usually loud and visible, grew oddly quiet. People noticed. They always notice when the volume changes. By midweek, I was summoned to a casual catch-up. The CEO's assistant scheduled it in one of the glass-walled conference rooms. He greeted me with his trademark grin, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. "We're a family here," he began, palms open like a preacher. I nodded, said nothing. He circled the subject. Loyalty, gratitude, growth, opportunities. Then softer. "You've been looking at things outside your lane, Jaden. That can create confusion." I kept my voice even. I document my work thoroughly, for accuracy. Sometimes I record calls to keep details straight. "May I record this one?" His smile froze for a fraction of a second before he laughed it off. "No need for that." Which, of course, was the worst answer he could give. 2 days later, auditors appeared. Not from HR, not from the CEO's circle, but external. They carried laptops, wore neutral expressions, and asked for access to finance systems. The office turned silent in the way only fear can enforce. Brad paced the hallways, trying to laugh it off, making louder jokes that no one answered. The CEO called in all hands and talked about rumors and distractions. His voice echoed against the ballroom chandelier we'd all stood under at the party. This time, no one clapped. That night, I walked home, the city lights buzzing faintly above me, and felt the slippers thumping in my bag with every step. They weren't a joke anymore. They were a countdown. If you've ever watched a storm roll in, clouds thickening, air tightening, animals going quiet, you know that pause before thunder hits. That's where we were, and I'd already planted the lightning rod. If this story resonates, stick around. Because the silence that followed was louder than anything my boss could shout. When people are guilty, they get louder. When evidence is guilty, it doesn't have to say a word. The Monday after the auditors arrived, the building felt off. Phones didn't ring as much. Conversations cut short when doors opened. Brad, normally the loudest voice in any room, became even louder, slapping backs, forcing laughter, filling silences that didn't need filling. He cornered me in the kitchen, flashing that rehearsed grin. "Jaden, you know how this looks, right? Numbers get messy. People make mistakes. Careers are built on loyalty. Don't overthink." He said it like a warning disguised as advice. I stirred my coffee, watched the spoon circle. Messy is one thing. Midnight edits are another. His smile cracked for half a second before he laughed too hard and walked out. By noon, the CEO staged a town hall. He stood under the same chandelier from the party, the room arranged exactly as before, as if recreating the scene could erase the past. "There's negativity circulating," he boomed. "We must remember, we're family. Families don't betray each other over misunderstandings." No applause this time, just the shuffle of chairs and the buzz of the HVAS. HR followed up with one-on-one wellness checks. Their questions weren't subtle. "Do you feel you can trust leadership? Have you noticed anyone creating unnecessary tension?" I answered each with dates, numbers, documented facts. Not feelings. Facts don't flinch. That night, a new message blinked on my phone. Finance director, a woman who'd been with the company longer than anyone else, sharp enough to see through fog. She sent a screenshot, a ledger line from the Innovation Moments Fund, $45,000 transferred out the week of the party, tagged with Brad's payroll code. "I think this is what you're looking for," she wrote. It was the missing puzzle piece. Dates aligned perfectly. The CEO's speech, Brad's bonus, the midnight edits, all tied to that one line. By Tuesday, Brad tried one last move, data hygiene. He blasted an email about cleaning up duplicates, urging analysts to delete old versions, streamline history. But the auditors had already imaged his laptop. Every deletion, every overwritten cell captured. He was too late. Personally, I was unraveling quietly. Rent loomed. My parents asked why I sounded distant on calls. Sleep came in fragments, dreams of fluorescent lights and the echo of forced laughter. But each morning I woke up, opened the Santa folder, and reminded myself I wasn't imagining this. The paper trail was real. By Thursday afternoon, the storm broke. The board placed the CEO on administrative leave pending review. Brad's keycard stopped working the same day. His desk sat abandoned, a half-empty energy drink sweating beside a mousepad. No announcement, no farewell email, just absence. The slippers under my desk felt lighter somehow, like the rubber had finally softened. Not victory, just proof that silence had a voice of its own. And it was louder than both of them combined. I mailed the slippers back with a note. "Keep the change." By the time the board announced the CEO's early retirement, the office had already adjusted to his absence. People whispered less, laughed more freely, even the air felt lighter in the hallways. Brad's name disappeared from Slack threads. His badge had been deactivated, his desk cleared overnight, and the ceremonial check photo vanished from the company's website as if it had never happened. The auditors wrapped up quickly. Their report didn't mince words. Misallocation of funds, falsified reporting, governance failures. The company scrambled to protect itself. Press releases about strengthening oversight. Memos about renewed commitment to transparency. But inside the walls, everyone knew what it really was. The empire of charisma had collapsed under a single folder of receipts. Then came the offer. HR and legal pulled me into a quiet conference room, blinds half drawn. They slid a packet across the table. Promotion, pay raise, even a leadership track. The catch was hidden in the last section, an NDA. Silence in exchange for advancement. I read it, line by line, then closed the folder. "I'll take the severance," I said, "but the gag clause comes out." The lawyers exchanged looks. HR shifted uncomfortably. Eventually they agreed. A clean break. My exit package was enough to breathe, to plan, to move on without looking back. I packed my desk slowly, filling a single box with nothing but a plant, a coffee mug, and the slippers. At home, I wrapped them in plain brown paper, scribbled the CEO's home address, easy enough to find, and slid in the note. Just 3 words. At the post office, the clerk didn't ask questions. She just weighed the box, printed the label, and pushed it onto the conveyor. Watching it disappear into the back felt like closing a file I'd carried too long. That night, I met Dana from payroll at a quiet bar 2 blocks from the office. She raised a glass without ceremony. "To clean ledgers," she said. I clinked mine against hers. No speeches, no applause, just quiet understanding. Walking home, I passed the hotel where the party had been held. The ballroom lights were dark, the DJ equipment long gone. A janitor pushed a mop bucket across the lobby, humming softly to himself. I stood there for a moment, the echo of that humiliating night still faint in the corners of my memory, and then I let it go. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes. Not the slippers. They were halfway across town by now, on their way to a man who'd learned that sometimes the smallest gifts come back with the heaviest weight. I slid into my own comfortable shoes, opened a clean calendar on my laptop, and stared at the empty squares. For the first time in a long while, the future wasn't booked by someone else's agenda. It was mine.